Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Midnight Murmurs tonight. I'll be your storyteller, guiding you through chilling accounts that were never meant to be uncovered. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe for more true horror stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now, because once you hear these stories, you might never look at the dark the same way again. I never thought buying a lake house would feel like a mistake. When I first pulled up to it, the place looked like something from a postcard. Calm waters stretching into the horizon, trees bending over the shore, the kind of silence you only find far away from the city. I told myself this was exactly what I needed. A retreat, a fresh start, but even that first night something felt off. The stillness wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating, like the air was waiting for me to make a sound so it could listen. Every creak of the old floorboards echoed through the halls, and the house seemed to breathe with me, expanding and contracting, like it was alive. I remember staring at the blueprints the realtor sent me, trying to map out where each door and hallway led. It all matched, except it didn't. The basement was different. A wall extended where the line said open space should be. I brushed it off at first, told myself it was just my eyes adjusting to the shadows. But when I found the locked door tucked away in that basement wall, hidden like it was never meant to be discovered, my retreat turned into something else entirely. The first few days in the lake house felt like playing house in someone else's skin. I unpacked my things, arranged them neatly, but nothing seemed to belong. The air smelled of damp wood and old stone, the kind of scent that lingers on your clothes. I tried to ignore it, chalk it up to age. By day, the house looked harmless. Sunlight spilled through the windows, casting warm streaks across the rustic furniture. The dock creaked softly whenever the lake rippled, and I almost convinced myself I'd made the right choice. But when night fell, everything changed. The water outside turned black and silent, and the walls began to whisper. I decided to map the house room by room, determined to feel in control. Upstairs, nothing unusual. 2 bedrooms and a narrow hallway that leaned with age. The kitchen downstairs was cramped but functional. But when I reached the basement, something gnawed at me. The concrete floor was uneven, cracked in places. Against the far wall stood an old wooden shelf, warped with water damage. Moving it aside revealed something I wasn't prepared for. A narrow wooden door set into the wall. No knob, no keyhole, just a padlock that looked older than the house itself. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I rushed upstairs, grabbed the blueprints, and laid them out on the table. According to the plans, that wall shouldn't even exist. The basement was supposed to be open, nothing hidden. Yet there it was. A door that wasn't supposed to be there. That night I tried to sleep, but my mind kept returning to the basement. At around 2 a.m, I heard it, a creak of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from directly above my room. Heart pounding, I forced myself to check, but the upstairs hallway was empty. When I returned to bed, I swore I heard something else, whispers, carried across the lake, faint and broken, like voices just out of reach. I told myself it was the wind. It had to be the wind. But deep down, I already knew the truth. The lake house was hiding something, and that locked door was the key. The moment I discovered that door, it became an itch I couldn't stop scratching. Every time I went down into the basement, my eyes were drawn to it, as if the wood itself pulsed with some quiet heartbeat. I tried not to obsess, but it didn't matter what I was doing upstairs. I could feel the door below me waiting. On the 3rd night, I gave in. I brought down a crowbar and a hammer, my hands trembling even though I told myself it was just an old utility room the builders had sealed off. The first strike rang out like a gunshot echoing through the hollow house. The padlock didn't budge. I hit it again. Still nothing. By the 5th strike, sweat dripped into my eyes, and yet the lock looked untouched, as though the metal refused to break. That night, I woke to a sound that made my blood run cold. Scratching. It came from the basement, directly behind the wall where the door stood. I lay frozen in bed, every nerve screaming at me to move, to get out. But my body wouldn't obey. When I finally forced myself to check, I found the basement door at the top of the stairs ajar. I knew for a fact I had locked it earlier. I slammed it shut, slid the bolt across, and tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Still, I couldn't shake the chill. The next afternoon, while drinking coffee on the porch, an older man from across the lake rode over. He introduced himself in a way that felt cautious, as though he wanted to make sure I was worth talking to. After a pause, he asked how I was settling in. His eyes flicked toward the house, then back to me as though measuring my reaction. I asked if he knew anything about the property's history. His jaw tightened. "That place has a reputation," he said slowly. "Not everyone likes to talk about it." Then he left without another word, rowing back across the water. The silence that followed was worse than any whisper. If the house had a dark past, why had no one warned me before? And more importantly, what the hell was behind that door? The storm rolled in without warning. One moment the lake lay calm, glassy and still, and the next the sky split open with thunder. Rain hammered against the windows, and the whole house seemed to groan with each gust of wind. I should have stayed upstairs, safe in bed, but something pulled me toward the basement. That door had been calling to me for days, and tonight I couldn't ignore it. Armed with nothing more than a flashlight and a crowbar, I went down into the damp air of the basement. The padlock shimmered under the beam, defiant, mocking me. I raised the crowbar and slammed it down again and again until finally, with a crack that echoed like a gunshot, the lock snapped. My heart pounded so loud I barely heard the storm outside anymore. I pulled the door open and the smell hit me first. Rot, mildew, something metallic underneath. The room was narrow, pitch black, with no windows. Dust swirled in the beam of my flashlight and the air felt thicker, heavier, as though it hadn't been disturbed in years. In the corner sat an old trunk, its leather straps brittle, the wood swollen from moisture. My hand shook as I dragged it into the open and forced it open. Inside were scraps of the past no one was meant to see. Drawings, crude and childlike, smeared with something dark I prayed was just dirt. A rope stiff with age and stained a sickly brown. And at the bottom a diary, its cover warped and pages swollen. I flipped through, my stomach twisting tighter with each frantic scrawl. The entries weren't neat, they were desperate. Someone wrote about keeping her safe and protecting the family. One line repeated over and over, "She can't leave this place." The words blurred as I realized what I was holding. This wasn't the work of a ghost or some curse. This was human. Someone had locked a child in that room, hidden away like an animal. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment I swore I heard breathing from the corner where the trunk had been. I stumbled back, my chest tight, my throat dry. I wanted to believe I'd imagined it, but I knew, deep down, the house hadn't kept its secrets buried. Not completely. After that night, the house changed. Or maybe it was me. I couldn't unsee the drawings, the diary, the rope. Every creak of the floorboard sounded heavier, deliberate, like someone pacing just out of sight. Even the lake lost its charm. What once looked calm now stared back at me like a sheet of black glass. The next evening, as I tried to sleep, I heard it again. Water running. But when I checked the sinks and the shower, everything was dry. The sound grew louder, echoing through the pipes until it seemed to rise from the basement itself. I grabbed my flashlight and forced myself down the steps. That's when I saw them. Wet footprints leading from the locked room, fresh prints glistening on the cracked concrete floor. I fled upstairs, my pulse hammering. That was no memory. Something was moving. Something alive. Desperate for answers, I cornered the old man across the lake the next day. He avoided my eyes at first, but when I pressed, his voice cracked. "They say the family before you. They lost a little girl. Neighbors thought she ran away. But no one ever saw her again. Folks whispered she never left that basement." He shook his head and rode away, leaving me colder than the water between us. The following nights blurred together in fragments of dread. Whispers seeping through the walls like a voice humming from underwater. A pressure on my chest while I slept, as though small hands pressed down, testing if I would wake. Shadows where no shadows should be, darting across doorways when I turned my head. I thought about leaving, stuffing a bag and never looking back, but each time I packed, something made me pause. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was a pull, a need to understand what this house wanted from me. On the fourth night, I woke to the sound of the basement door swinging open. The air carried that same metallic rot, stronger than before. My flashlight trembled in my grip as I followed the scent down, every step heavier, slower. The footprints were waiting for me again, fresh, leading directly into the blackness of that hidden room, and this time, I knew I had to follow. The basement light flickered once, then died, plunging me into darkness so thick I couldn't see my own hands. My breath came fast, ragged, and the silence pressed against my ears until I thought they'd burst. Then I heard it, small, deliberate footsteps circling me in the dark. I froze. My flashlight sputtered, casting broken beams across the walls. For the briefest moment, I caught sight of something wet dripping from the ceiling, pooling into the fresh footprints that surrounded me. And then came the voice, soft, childlike, whispering my name with a clarity that cut deeper than any scream. It didn't sound distant or old or imagined. It sounded close. Too close. I stumbled back toward the stairs, but the door at the top slammed shut with a force that rattled the house. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, as though more than one voice spoke now. A chorus of children calling me, begging me to stay. I pressed myself against the wall, my chest heaving, my skin cold with sweat. And in that final moment before the flashlight died completely, I swear I saw a small hand reaching out of the darkness, reaching for me. The rest, I can't explain. I never should have agreed to stay at the lake house alone. The place had been in my family for decades, a quiet getaway that people always described as peaceful. But the first night I stepped through the old wooden door, I realized that peaceful can feel a lot like suffocating silence. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of wet earth and pine. From the wide windows in the living room, the black sheet of water stretched endlessly, broken only by the faint shimmer of moonlight. It was beautiful, sure, but unsettling too. That first night I heard it. A soft metallic click followed by the creak of wood. I thought it was nothing until I walked into the room and saw it. The large windows facing the lake had opened wide, their curtains trembling like someone had just slipped out. I knew I had locked them. I felt my chest tighten, telling myself it had to be the wind or maybe a faulty latch. But when I closed them, pressed the locks down firmly and walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not from inside the house, but from the water itself. The second night was worse. I went to bed early, telling myself I'd sleep through the strangeness. But sometime after midnight, I woke up with the uneasy sense that something wasn't right. The house was quiet, too quiet. No rustle of branches outside, no distant hum of insects. Just the low, steady lap of water against the dock. My throat felt dry as I sat up in bed, straining to listen. That's when I heard it again, the click. Then the groan. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and crept barefoot down the hallway. The old floorboards betrayed me, groaning under my weight, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. The closer I got to the living room, the stronger the chill in the air became. When I finally turned the corner, the sight stopped me cold. The windows. Wide open. Curtains pushed aside like hands had yanked them apart. Beyond them, the lake stretched into darkness, perfectly still under the moon. I rushed forward, slamming them shut, locking the latches as tight as I could. My pulse hammered in my ears. I told myself it was faulty hardware, nothing more. But then I checked my phone. 2:47 a.m., the exact same time as the night before. It became a pattern. Every night that week, no matter how carefully I locked the windows, I'd wake to the sound of them opening again. Always at the same time. Always facing the water. By the fourth night, I was exhausted. The moment the clock neared 2:30, I sat in the living room, flashlight in hand, waiting. The air grew heavier, thick with the smell of damp wood and lake water. My skin prickled as I watched the hands of the clock inch closer. 46, I held my breath. 47, the locks clicked. On their own. Slowly, deliberately, the windows began to slide open, creaking as if unseen hands were forcing them wide. The flashlight shook in my grip, the beam bouncing across the glass. My chest tightened as I stepped closer, heart hammering. Eyes locked on the water. That was when I thought I saw it. Something pale shifting just below the surface. Gone the moment I blinked. The next morning, I tore into the windows like a madman. I checked every hinge, every lock, every groove in the frame. Nothing was broken, nothing loose. There was no reason they should be opening on their own. Still, I wasn't about to let it happen again. That evening, before the sun went down, I hammered nails into the wooden frames, sealing them shut. I stacked a dresser against one side, chairs against the other, and wrapped duct tape across the seams until my hands were raw. If the wind wanted in, it would have to blow the whole house apart. But when the night came, I couldn't shake the dread. I sat in the dark, the ticking of the clock pounding in my skull, waiting for 2:47. My eyes flicked between the window and the time glowing on my phone screen, 46. I leaned forward, whispering to myself, "It won't happen. It can't happen." The sound hit me like a gunshot. The nails rattled, The dresser shuddered, the tape strained, and then, impossibly, the locks unlatched with a crisp, metallic click. Slowly, stubbornly, the windows forced themselves open, the tape splitting with a sharp tear. The dresser screeched across the floor as though invisible hands shoved it aside. My breath caught in my throat. The night air poured in, cold and damp, smelling of algae and rot. My flashlight beam trembled across the glass, and that's when I saw it. Movement in the lake. At first, just ripples disturbing the otherwise still surface. Then shapes, long, pale, almost human. They floated just beneath the water, drifting like bodies caught in a current. But the lake was still. There was no current. I stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs. The flashlight slipped from my hand, clattering against the floor. When I snatched it up again, the shapes were gone, swallowed by the blackness of the water. I slammed the windows shut with all my weight, pressing the locks down until they groaned. But the smell lingered, and so did the silence. That awful, suffocating silence, broken only by my own ragged breathing. That was the night I stopped believing it was just the wind. Something wanted those windows open, and it wanted me to see the lake. By the following day, I couldn't stand not knowing. Sleep-deprived and half-delirious, I drove into town to ask questions. The locals eyed me the way people do when they recognize a face but don't want to get involved. At the diner, an old man finally broke the silence. He leaned close, lowering his voice. That house was built too close to the water. Folks say it sits on cursed ground. Back in the 50s, 3 kids drowned out there. Bodies never found. Some say they come back at night looking for company. He chuckled nervously after, like he was only half joking, but his eyes didn't match the laugh. They were dead serious. I left the diner with my stomach in knots. I didn't believe in ghost stories, but I couldn't ignore how perfectly his tale fit what I'd seen. When I got back to the house, the air inside felt heavier, humid, like a storm had passed through. My shoes squelched against the floor. Confused, I looked down and froze. Wet footprints. They started beneath the windows and trailed across the wooden planks, disappearing into the hallway. My pulse raced as I followed them, each step creaking beneath my weight. The smell of stagnant water grew stronger with every footfall, a stench that clung to the back of my throat. The trail ended at my bedroom door. I stood there, trembling, staring at the faint outline of damp toes pressed into the wood grain. My hand hovered over the doorknob, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. Not then, not alone. That night, I sat awake in the living room, shotgun propped against my lap. The storm outside howled, thunder shaking the walls. Every creak of the house made me flinch. I thought maybe the storm would mask the usual sounds. Maybe I'd be spared from the ritual at 2:47. But right on time, the locks clicked. I spun toward the windows, flashlight sweeping across the glass. The curtains fluttered, though the storm had died suddenly, leaving an unnatural stillness. And then I noticed something new. Water seeping across the floorboards, creeping toward my feet. It wasn't just the windows anymore. Whatever lived in the lake was trying to come inside. The storm broke fully that night. Lightning cracked across the sky, the lake glowing in white flashes that burned images into my eyes. The windows banged open so violently I thought the glass might shatter. The sound of water roared through the house, though the lake itself was calm, almost deliberate in its stillness. I tried to slam the windows shut, but the moment I touched the frame, an icy hand gripped mine from the outside. I jerked back with a scream, stumbling across the room. The flashlight beam cut across the window and froze me in place. A figure stood there. Its skin was the color of moonlight, dripping with water that streaked down the glass. Long hair hung over its face, and when it lifted its head, I saw eyes that weren't eyes at all. Just black voids, endless and hollow. Its lips moved, whispering words I couldn't hear, like the lake itself was speaking through it. I backed toward the door, but every window in the house slammed open in unison, the sound deafening like the walls themselves were screaming. Curtains whipped, frames rattled, and more shapes appeared. Small faces pressing against the glass, children's faces, their mouths gaping open as if filled with water. The smell of rot and algae suffocated me. My shotgun slipped from my hands as I clutched my chest, trying to breathe. The house seemed alive, pulling me toward the open windows, the floor tilting under my feet. "Get away," I shouted, my voice cracking. But they didn't move. They only stared. The children's mouths opened wider, and this time I heard it. The garbled sound of drowning, voices layered and distorted, echoing in my head. My vision blurred as something wet coiled around my ankle. I looked down to see a trail of water snaking up my leg, gripping tight, dragging me inch by inch across the floor. I clawed at the wood, nails splintering, but the force was relentless, cold as the depths of the lake. In that moment, I realized they weren't just opening the windows for air. They were opening them for me. I fought with everything I had, kicking, clawing, dragging myself against the pull. My fingers found the edge of the shotgun, slick with lake water, but when I tried to lift it, another surge yanked me closer to the open window. My body scraped across the floorboards, splinters stabbing into my palms as I screamed. The faces outside pressed harder against the glass, their black eyes wide, their mouths spilling endless streams of water that pooled at my feet. The pale figure leaned in, whispering now, but I couldn't understand the words. They weren't meant to be understood. They were meant to lure. With a final desperate lunge, I wrenched myself free, bolted for the door, and burst into the storm. The rain hit me like needles, mud sucking at my shoes as I sprinted to my truck. I didn't look back, not once. I just drove, tires spitting gravel, the house shrinking in my rearview mirror. But I'll never forget it. The way every window had opened in perfect unison, all facing the lake, as if the house itself was bowing to something older, something waiting beneath the surface, and sometimes, even now, I wake at 2:47 a.m., convinced I still hear the locks clicking open. I should have known the lake house wasn't the kind of place you went to for peace. When my uncle left it to me, everyone told me how lucky I was. A place by the water, quiet nights, a dock stretching out into the black glass surface of the lake. It sounded like an escape from the noise of the city, from the weight of everything pressing down on me. I wanted silence, stillness. That's exactly what I got, only not in the way I expected. The first night, the silence felt unnatural. Not peaceful, not gentle, heavy, like something pressing against the windows. I woke up a little before midnight, throat dry, the kind of restless stirring that pulls you from uneasy dreams. I wandered toward the living room, meaning to grab a glass of water when I saw it through the window. Someone was standing at the end of the dock. They weren't moving. Just a black shape against the pale reflection of the moon on the water, arms slack, shoulders rigid. It was too far to see a face, but the stillness, that awful stillness, rooted me in place. I thought I was dreaming. I wasn't. The next morning I told myself it had to be exhaustion. I'd driven nearly 6 hours to get here, unpacked boxes, wrestled with the electricity, and tried to settle into a house that had been empty for years. My mind had probably stitched shadows into shapes, but when night came again, the dread crawled back with it. I kept checking the clock as if daring myself to stay awake past midnight. By 11:50, I was pacing the floor, glancing out the wide glass window that overlooked the dock. The lake was calm, moonlight shimmering across its surface. Nothing unusual. Then at 12:03, there they were, a figure, same spot, standing at the end of the dock as if waiting. My stomach knotted, but this time, instead of freezing, I grabbed the flashlight by the door and stormed outside. The boards of the deck groaned under my feet, each step echoing louder than I expected. The air was sharp, cold against my lungs, but when I got closer, the dock was empty. Just the creak of wet wood and the black water lapping at the posts. I shined the flashlight across the lake. Nothing. No boat, no swimmer, no signs of anyone leaving. It was as if the figure had dissolved into the night. I stood there, gripping the railing, trying to convince myself someone was sneaking onto the property. A prank, some drunk fisherman. Anything but what it felt like. By the third night, the routine had already begun. Midnight. The figure appeared. Always still, always waiting. And always gone the moment I dared to move closer. The fear was getting under my skin, crawling into the parts of me I couldn't reason with. Every creak of the old house made me jump. I started locking doors twice, triple-checking windows, sleeping with the flashlight beside me. And yet each night, at the stroke of midnight, I found myself standing at the glass, heart pounding, staring at the dock, and every night they were there, waiting. By the fourth night, I couldn't pretend it was just exhaustion or tricks of the light. Someone, or something, was coming to that dock. I needed an explanation, anything that could make sense of it. The next morning, I walked over to the nearest neighbor, an older man named Frank, who lived about half a mile up the shoreline. His place was weathered but alive, tools scattered across his porch, a canoe flipped upside down on the grass. I told him, half laughing, that someone had been trespassing on my dock at night. The way his face shifted, how the humor drained from his eyes, made my stomach tighten. "No one comes out on that water after dark," he said flatly. "Not anymore." I asked what he meant, but he just shook his head and muttered something about accidents. People drowning. A history of the lake taking more than it ever gave back. When I pressed, he leaned in and whispered, "That house of yours, it's got stories. Fella who owned it before you, he used to say the lake wanted him. Said he saw things on that dock. Died out there too. Boat flipped, or so they claim. Never found his body." His words burrowed deep like hooks snagging flesh. I wanted to laugh it off, but the weight in his voice was too heavy. That night I told myself I wouldn't look. I pulled the curtains tight, turned up the TV, tried drowning out the silence. But just before midnight, the electricity flickered and the screen went black. I felt it before I saw it. The pressure in the room. The hair standing on my neck. Against my better judgment, I peeled back the curtain. The figure was there. Still. Watching. But this time something was different. The reflection of the moon rippled across the water, and for a split second, I swore I saw the figure's head tilt, not natural, not curious, but like it was acknowledging me. I dropped the curtain, heart slamming, whispering to myself that it wasn't real. It couldn't be. But I knew then what Frank had meant. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't human, and it wasn't leaving. The nights blurred together after that. Sleep slipped through my fingers, and even when I closed my eyes, I swore I could hear the water lapping against the posts of the dock, closer, heavier, like footsteps dragging through the shallows. By the seventh night, something changed. When I finally worked up the nerve to check the window, the figure wasn't at the end of the dock anymore. It was halfway up, closer to the house than it had ever been before. I froze. My breath fogged against the glass, and for a long moment I couldn't move. Then I noticed the trail, dark, wet streaks across the dock's wood, footprints, leading from the water to where it now stood. The next morning I found them still there. Damp outlines, toes pointed toward the house. My heart thudded as I crouched down to touch the boards. Cold. As if the water hadn't dried, as if it had seeped into the wood itself. I started documenting everything. Times, dates, sketches. I told myself proof would help me hold on to sanity. But each page only reminded me that whatever I was seeing was real. On the 10th night, the pounding started. At first it was soft, thuds against the side of the house like branches in the wind. But the air was still, no breeze, no storm. The thuds grew louder, more deliberate, rattling the windows, shaking the frame of the house. I grabbed the flashlight, hands trembling, and crept to the living room. The glass panes quivered with every slam. I lifted the beam toward the dock, empty. The figure was gone. Then from the corner of the window I caught it, pale, dripping, pressed close to the glass. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the couch. By the time I dared look again, it wasn't there. Just darkness and my reflection staring back. That night I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the center of the room with the flashlight in one hand and a knife in the other. Every nerve in my body wound so tight I thought I'd snap. But even then, I knew. Midnight wasn't the end of it. Midnight was only the beginning. I decided I couldn't stay. Whatever this was, it wanted me there, and I wasn't going to give it the chance. I packed a bag before sundown, tossing clothes and my journal into the trunk of my car. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys twice. When I turned the ignition, nothing happened. Just a hollow click, then silence. I tried again and again until the battery coughed its last weak breath. Dead. My phone, too, had drained overnight, though I swore I'd left it charging. The lake pressed against the house with a suffocating silence. No insects, no frogs, no owls. Just stillness. By midnight, I knew I was trapped. I stood at the window watching. The figure was already there, waiting at the end of the dock. Only this time I didn't feel fear. I felt inevitability, like all the nights before had been leading me here. I stepped outside, each board creaking beneath my weight as I made my way down the dock. The water below shimmered black, swallowing the reflection of the stars. The figure didn't move. Not until I was only a few feet away. Then its head lifted, and I saw its face. My face, pale, waterlogged, eyes clouded white, skin stretched tight over bone. It wasn't just someone. It was me, drowned, ruined, as if I had been rotting at the bottom of the lake for years. I stumbled back, choking on air, but my legs wouldn't hold me. The dock swayed and the smell of stagnant water filled my lungs. The figure's lips parted, and though no sound came, I knew what it was saying. It wanted me. The lake wanted me. And in that moment, staring at the dripping, lifeless version of myself, I realized maybe it already had. I don't remember falling. One second I was on the dock, the next I was underwater, the black weight of the lake folding over me. The cold punched the air from my lungs, dragging me deeper, pressing me into silence. I thrashed, clawed upward, but it felt endless, no surface, no light. Just the cold hands of the lake wrapping around my chest, and then I woke up. I was on the floor of the living room, gasping, clothes soaked, hair dripping onto the wood. My lungs burned, water spilling from my mouth like I'd been drowning for hours. The clock read 3 a.m. The dock was empty. For days after, I told myself I imagined it. A nightmare brought on by isolation, grief, stress. But the footprints never dried, and every midnight I still feel it. The pull. The silence pressing against the glass, daring me to look. Sometimes I catch my reflection, and it lingers a moment too long, as if it's waiting to trade places. I haven't left the lake house, maybe I can't, and sometimes, in the stillness, I wonder if I already drowned that night. If what's left of me is only the lake. Telling my story. I always thought the lake house would bring me peace. Tucked away in the pines, miles from the nearest neighbor, it felt like a sanctuary the first time I saw it. The realtor had called the master bedroom the crown jewel, boasting of its wide glass window that opened onto the lake, as if the water itself had been painted there just for me. In daylight, it was breathtaking, the kind of view that made you forget the world outside even existed. But at night, that same window stopped being beautiful. It turned into a black mirror, a void that stared back at me with the weight of something alive. On my first night, I lay in bed trying to embrace the silence. It wasn't city quiet. It was deeper, heavier, broken only by the occasional lap of water against the shore. But sleep didn't come. At some hour past midnight, I woke suddenly, heart racing for no reason I could explain. My eyes drifted to the window. For a moment, I thought I was only staring at my own reflection. Then my blood froze. My reflection's head tilted, but mine didn't. I told myself it had to be exhaustion. Long drive, new surroundings, nerves playing tricks. But when I finally forced my head to tilt, the reflection straightened a heartbeat too late, like it was following, not mirroring. I stayed awake until dawn, staring at that glass until the sky lightened enough to wash the lake in silver. Only then did the reflection seem normal again, though I couldn't shake the hollow pit in my stomach. Morning made everything feel ridiculous. Sunlight streamed across the water. The air smelled of pine and wet earth, and I laughed at myself over coffee. By daylight, the house was perfect. Weathered wood, creaking floors, the faint scent of cedar. It felt old but welcoming, like it had stories hidden in its beams. I walked the shoreline, let the icy water slip over my hands, tried to convince myself the house was only eerie because of my imagination. Still, when the sun set again, unease crept back. The glass window dominated the bedroom, swallowing the room whole once the outside darkened. It wasn't just that I could see myself. It was that I couldn't see beyond myself. The lake, the trees, everything disappeared into a curtain of black. That night, as I lay down, the house began to settle with deep groans in the wood. Somewhere a door shifted, clicking faintly like it had been nudged open. I tightened the blankets around me, telling myself it was only the house breathing. But when the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps pressed across the porch boards outside, the air in my chest locked. I waited, straining my ears. The footsteps stopped directly outside the bedroom wall, just beyond the glass. I wanted to believe it was some animal, but the boards creaked in a way only human weight, could make. My hand hovered above the lamp switch, but I didn't turn it on. Somehow the dark felt safer. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Minutes stretched until finally, as if retreating, the porch creaked once more, then again, fading into nothing. I lay frozen for hours, never daring to look at the window. The next morning, I forced myself onto the porch where I'd heard the steps. The boards looked ordinary, weathered but strong, no signs of anyone passing through. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that the wood remembered. I stepped down onto the damp earth, following the faint trail toward the lake. That's when I saw them, Marks pressed into the dirt, long grooves like something heavy had been dragged from the waterline toward the house. No footprints, no tire tracks, just two clean, deep ruts. I crouched down, fingertips grazing the grooves, half expecting them to still be wet. A chill worked its way through me, though the morning sun was warm on my skin. Whatever had made those marks had vanished, but the earth didn't lie. Something had been there. That night I tried convincing myself again that it was all explainable. Old houses creak. Animals prowl. My mind fills in the rest. But when I returned to bed, staring once more into that glass expanse, the reflection betrayed me. It moved, yes, but not quite right. I lifted my hand, fingers stiff with dread. The reflection copied, but a second too late. I sat up, leaning closer to the window. My breath fogged the glass faintly, but the reflection's fog bloomed wider, thicker, as though it came from lungs bigger than mine. I pulled back, trembling. For hours I tested it. I raised my arm. It followed, delayed. I turned my head sharply. It lagged, like someone fumbling to keep up. Finally, I did nothing, sitting perfectly still, eyes locked on that dark twin. After a long pause, its lips curled into a smile. I stumbled back so fast I tripped over the edge of the bed, slamming onto the floor with a thud that echoed through the quiet house. My chest heaved, but I didn't get up. I couldn't. That smile lingered on the glass, framed by night, as if the reflection knew I was broken by it. I must have blacked out from exhaustion, because the next thing I remember was waking in gray dawn light. The reflection looked normal again, but the smile burned in my memory. The lake outside rippled with wind, calm and empty, but I couldn't look at it the same anymore. I couldn't spend another night wondering if I was losing my mind. During the day, the house looked harmless, even cozy, but every shadow seemed to whisper that it was hiding something. I started searching through drawers, cabinets, anything left behind. Most of it was harmless junk. Old postcards, brittle newspapers, moth-eaten curtains folded in a trunk. But tucked in a cracked leather album, I found the photographs. At first, they looked like normal family pictures. Summer barbecues, kids running in the yard. A man with his arm draped around a woman as they stood on the porch. Smile, sunlight, all the things a lake house should mean. But then I noticed something strange. In every picture taken inside the bedroom, the family wasn't facing the camera. They were turned toward the window, backs rigid, as if they were being photographed while watching something outside. Or maybe something inside. I set the album down, unsettled, my skin crawling with the weight of unseen eyes. That night, as soon as the sky folded into black, I tried to avoid looking at the glass. But curiosity gnawed at me until I finally glanced up. The reflection was waiting. At first it copied me, the same delayed mimicry I'd already come to dread. But then I blinked and it didn't. I shifted my shoulders and it stayed perfectly still. My throat tightened as I realized it wasn't following at all anymore. It was watching. When I leaned forward to peer closer, it smiled. Wide. Too wide. I staggered back, heart slamming against my ribs, whispering no, no, no over and over like a prayer. I fled the room, clutching the photo album as if the paper images could somehow protect me. In the hallway, I forced myself to open it again, searching for anything, any clue. That's when I noticed the final page. A picture, warped with water damage, showed the family once more. But this time their faces weren't blurred by bad focus, they were missing. Each head was turned sharply to the side, twisted toward the window, leaving only the outlines of jaws stretched open. I slammed the album shut and dropped it to the floor. Somewhere behind me, glass creaked like a fingertip dragging slowly across its surface. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the bedroom. I dragged a blanket to the couch in the living room, where the only windows were small and high, safe from becoming mirrors. I tried to convince myself that distance would protect me, but I woke in the middle of the night with the strangest certainty that I wasn't alone. The air smelled faintly of lake water, damp and metallic. My skin prickled as I sat up, heart thrumming. The sound came next, a faint scraping, wood against wood, coming from down the hall. I crept forward, barefoot on the creaking boards, until I reached the bedroom door. It was ajar, though I knew I had shut it tight. The barricade I'd built earlier that day, dresser dragged in front of the window, chair braced against the frame, was gone. Neatly removed, as if someone had undone it with careful hands. My stomach dropped. I forced myself to look at the glass. The reflection stood there, closer than ever, pressed against the inside as if the barrier had flipped. My chest constricted as I watched it lift a hand and press its palm flat against the pane. My skin turned ice when the glass bowed inward, just slightly, like something was pressing from the other side. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. And then suddenly I was staring at myself, not in the window but across the room. My double stood in the corner, half shrouded in shadow, watching with the same wide smile I'd seen before. I wanted to scream, but my body betrayed me. I was frozen, locked in place, every muscle rigid as though the reflection had stolen control. My double took a step forward, its movements heavy, deliberate, like a puppet cutting its strings. The lights flickered, shadows rippling across the ceiling. I felt my body strain, desperate to run, but it wasn't mine anymore. I was trapped inside my own skin while something else looked through my eyes. The room trembled, the floor beneath me shaking like something vast and heavy moved below. The whispers returned, louder now, rising from the lake, from the walls, from inside my own chest. They were calling my name. The whispers followed me as I stumbled through the house, every door locked, every window sealed tight. My fists pounded the wood until my knuckles split, but the house didn't give. It wanted me here. The guest book lay open in the center of the floor, its pages glowing faintly in the dark, words carving themselves into existence with each breath I took. I read the final line even though I didn't want to. He walks into the water willingly, and then the air shifted. My body moved without thought, my feet dragging me toward the door that suddenly swung wide open. The night was cold, the lake shimmering like a sheet of black glass. I tried to stop, to dig my heels into the ground, but something unseen tugged at me. Gentle at first, then forceful, relentless. At the shoreline, I gasped for air, my lungs tight as if already filling with water. The lake rippled, though no wind touched it. Shapes moved beneath the surface, dozens of them, pale faces pressed against the glassy veil, waiting. The last thing I remember is the sensation of hands, cold, firm, endless, pulling me under. My scream never left the water. I still remember the first night I pulled up to the lake house. The water was black glass under the moon, the kind that swallows sound, where even the crickets seemed to hush when my car engine died. The realtor had called it peaceful. To me, it felt like the kind of silence that waits for something to happen. The house itself leaned forward from the trees, its windows reflecting the lake like empty eyes. Inside, everything smelled of old wood and damp stone. It should have been comforting, like history holding me close, but there was something off, something I couldn't name. I dragged my bags through the narrow hallway, and that's when I saw it. A long antique mirror stood at the end, warped just enough to make the glass shimmer. I paused. My reflection paused too, except when I tilted my head it didn't move right away. Just half a second behind, like it needed to think about it first. I laughed it off, told myself it was bad lighting, travel exhaustion. But even as I shut the door to my bedroom, I couldn't shake the image of myself staring back, with eyes that seemed just a little too curious. The first morning should have felt like freedom. I made coffee, stepped onto the back deck, and stared at the wide sheet of water stretching out into mist. The lake was so still it looked painted, but every now and then, I'd hear a faint ripple like something just beneath the surface shifting closer to shore. I tried to focus on the positives. No traffic, no neighbors yelling through paper-thin walls, no city grime coating my lungs. Just me, the trees, and the lake. But even in that quiet, I felt watched, as if the windows of the house weren't looking out at the lake but looking in at me. Inside, I started unpacking. Every room had at least one mirror. Some were old, framed in carved wood, others small and practical above sinks or dressers. At first I didn't think much of it, just decor left behind by the last owner. But as I moved from room to room, I noticed something odd. In the living room, I passed by a tall standing mirror. My reflection was smiling faintly, even though I wasn't. In the bathroom, steam from my shower fogged the glass, but behind the blur, my reflection lifted its hand a second before I did. Little things, subtle enough that I questioned if I was imagining them. At night, the house came alive with creaks and sighs. I'd hear the faint slap of water against the dock, though the lake looked still as death when I peered through the window. And always the mirrors seemed to pull at my eyes, begging me to check them. Sometimes I swore there was movement behind me in the reflection, like a figure standing in the hallway, vanishing when I turned around. I started telling myself I was tired, That moving stress, caffeine, and too much isolation were playing tricks on me, but deep down I knew better. The mirrors weren't just showing me. They were showing something else, something waiting for me to notice, and once I noticed, I couldn't unsee it. By the third night, sleep was a stranger. I'd lie awake listening to the lake lap faintly at the dock, counting each sound like footsteps coming closer. The house seemed to breathe in the dark, its walls settling with groans that felt almost intentional, like whispers too low for words. I tried to ignore the mirrors. I draped towels over them, turned them to face the wall. Still, I found myself catching glimpses, tiny betrayals of glass I'd missed. The hallway mirror I thought I'd covered perfectly had a sliver exposed at the corner, and through it I swore I saw pale skin pass behind me. When I spun around, the hall was empty. During the day, it wasn't much better. While drinking coffee at the kitchen counter, the window over the sink showed me standing at the dock. I blinked hard, looked again, and the dock was empty. Another time, I leaned over the bathroom sink to splash water on my face, and in the mirror my reflection stayed bent a beat too long, grinning at me like it knew something I didn't. The worst was the sound. One evening just before dusk I heard it, something heavy splashing into the lake. I ran out onto the deck, scanning the water. The ripples spread wide as though something enormous had surfaced and gone under again, but there was nothing. No fish, no boat, no reason. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. I even laughed out loud, muttering that I'd gone soft, letting a few old mirrors and quiet nights spook me. But when I caught sight of myself in the glass of the sliding door, the laugh stuck in my throat. My reflection wasn't laughing. Its face was blank, lips pressed thin, eyes staring straight into mine with a coldness that made my chest tighten. For a heartbeat, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then I snapped the curtain shut, locked the door, and told myself I was just tired, just imagining things. But in that moment, deep down, I knew. I wasn't alone in the lake house. I thought covering the mirrors would help. I spent nearly an hour with bed sheets and duct tape, hiding every reflective surface I could find. By the time I finished, the house looked like it was being packed away for storage. The silence afterward was heavy, suffocating, as if the house itself resented me for blinding its eyes. That night, I slept deeper, until the sound woke me. A faint tapping, rhythmic, coming from the covered mirror in the hallway. At first I told myself it was the house settling, wood shifting in the night. But the sound grew sharper, deliberate, like fingernails on glass. When I finally pulled the sheet aside, my stomach dropped. My reflection stood there perfectly still, except its hand was raised, pressed against the inside of the glass. Mine hung useless at my side. It smiled, a slow curl of lips, and I stumbled back, dragging the sheet down over the mirror again like a curtain against a nightmare. From then on, the reflections didn't confine themselves to mirrors. They bled into windows, the glossy black of the TV screen, even the dark surface of the lake. I'd catch glimpses of myself, no, of it, standing where I wasn't, watching with a hunger that seemed less ghostly, more human. One evening I stood on the deck staring at the water. The lake was calm, a perfect mirror, and there I was staring back up at me. But it wasn't just me. The figure in the water grinned wide, lips splitting too far, teeth sharp and glinting. I staggered back and the water rippled, distorting the image. I didn't dare go near the shore again. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It wasn't some trick of light. It was me, or something wearing my face, something becoming more solid every night. Its movements were smoother now, almost synchronized, except for the moments it chose not to follow, moments when it stood still and smiled while I trembled. It wasn't haunting me. It was waiting for me to give in. I needed answers. My nerves were frayed raw, and every creak in the floorboards felt like a threat, so I drove into town, found the only diner that still looked alive, and asked the locals about the house. Most people stiffened at the mention of it, their conversations dissolving into silence. Finally, an older man slid onto the stool beside me. His hands shook as he stirred his coffee. "You bought the lake house?" he asked. When I nodded, his eyes darted to the window as if even saying the words invited something closer. There was another man who lived there, years ago, said the mirrors weren't right, kept talking about seeing himself, but not himself. Next thing we knew, he'd boarded up the windows. People said he went mad. Others swore they saw someone walking the shoreline at night, looked just like him. A week later, he drowned in that lake. The words clung to me like frost as I drove back. I tried to convince myself it was just rumor, small-town superstition. But deep down I knew it was the truth. That night I tore every sheet from the mirrors. If this thing wanted me, I needed to face it. One by one I walked the halls, heart hammering, until I stopped at the long mirror in the hallway, the same one that had first unsettled me. This time, the reflection didn't wait. It raised its hand before I did, its grin splitting wide, eyes burning with life. For the first time it moved independently, tilting its head with curiosity, studying me like prey. "Why me?" I whispered. My reflection tilted its head further, then smiled wider, lips stretching too thin, too sharp. I stumbled back, but it didn't follow. It only watched, patient, as though it already knew the ending. And when I turned away, I swear I felt breath on the back of my neck. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with every light on, waiting, listening to the house breathe around me. Every shadow felt alive, every surface a doorway. My reflection was everywhere now, glass, water, even the faint gleam of polished wood. I couldn't escape it. Near dawn, I made a choice. I grabbed my keys, stuffed a bag with whatever I could, and headed for the door. But as I reached for the handle, I froze. The glass of the window beside it showed me already outside, standing on the dock, smiling. I shut my eyes and yanked the door open. The cold morning air hit my face, but the dock was empty. My chest heaved as I sprinted to the car, fumbling with the keys. For a heartbeat, I thought I was free. But when I caught sight of the rearview mirror, my stomach turned to ice. The man staring back wasn't me. His grin was wide, teeth gleaming, eyes full of hunger. And as the engine roared to life, I realized the truth with bone-deep certainty. I hadn't left the house at all. The house had left me. I always thought the lake house would feel like a retreat, a quiet escape from the noise of my everyday life. But the moment I stepped out of my car and saw it again, I knew something wasn't right. The air felt too still, too heavy, like the woods surrounding the property were holding their breath. The scent of damp pine clung to everything, and beneath it was another smell I couldn't place. Something faint, like stagnant water. Inside, the house looked just as I remembered from childhood visits. The creak of the floorboards, the narrow hallways, the faint echo when doors shut. But my attention kept drifting toward a door I had never been allowed to open before. My uncle always kept it locked, always said the basement was unfinished and unsafe. That door was unlocked now. The metal handle was icy under my palm as I pushed it open, revealing a steep wooden staircase leading downward. My breath caught in my throat. There was no cement floor at the bottom. Instead, the stairs vanished into a black pool of water that shifted gently, as if stirred by something beneath the surface, and then, quietly, I heard it move. I froze at the top of the basement stairs, staring into the dark pool below. The water was impossibly still at first glance, yet every few seconds a faint ripple broke across the surface, as though something had just brushed beneath it. I stepped back and shut the door, convincing myself I'd imagined it. But the damp smell lingered in my nose, and no matter where I stood in the house, I swore I could hear it, the faint dripping, the hush of moving water where there shouldn't be any. This lake house was supposed to be mine now. My uncle left it to me when he passed. Everyone said his heart gave out suddenly, but no one questioned why it happened here, alone, in a place he hardly let anyone visit. I thought inheriting it was a kind of gift, some chance to reconnect with family history. But already, it felt like the house didn't want me here. I busied myself with unpacking, trying to ignore the pull of that basement door. Yet as night settled, the sounds grew louder, drips echoing through the floorboards, soft as whispers. Finally, I grabbed a flashlight and told myself I'd face whatever was down there. The stairs groaned under my weight as I descended, each step colder than the last. My light cut across slick wood beams, bouncing off the shifting blackness below. I crouched, leaning forward, expecting to see reflections of the basement ceiling. But there was nothing. No reflection of me, no light, just an endless dark liquid swallowing everything that touched it. I tossed a screw from my pocket into the water. It should have plinked or at least splashed. Instead, it disappeared without a sound, vanishing like it had been swallowed whole. A chill shot down my spine, and before I could climb back up, something moved. Not a ripple this time, a definite shift, like a body gliding just out of sight. I nearly dropped my flashlight as I stumbled backward up the steps, heart hammering so hard I could barely breathe. I slammed the door and pressed my weight against it, listening. Silence. No water. No movement. But that silence felt worse than the sound, because it meant whatever was down there was waiting. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the basement door opening on its own, water seeping up the stairs one step at a time until it reached my room. At some point I must have dozed off because I jolted awake to the sound of something tapping below me. Slow, rhythmic, like knuckles against wood, but muffled by water. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe the water had leaked in from the lake outside. Maybe it explained the smell, the dampness, even the noises. But when I pulled out my phone to look up anything about underground springs, I noticed something odd. No signal. I could have sworn I had bars when I arrived. The next morning, I forced myself back down the stairs with a tape measure. My plan was simple: dip it in, check the depth, and get proof it was just groundwater. But the tape slid endlessly downward, unspooling foot after foot without hitting bottom. My hand trembled as I yanked it back. The metal tip was wet, but the line was clean, like it hadn't touched anything at all. I tossed in a piece of firewood next. It didn't splash. It didn't bob. It simply sank, disappearing like the screw had. No sound, no trace. Just gone. That night the house grew restless. Every creak sounded heavier, more deliberate, like footsteps circling me. And then I heard it. The water wasn't silent anymore. It echoed with faint whispers. Dozens of voices just below the surface, overlapping, almost chanting. At first I thought it was my imagination, until I heard my name, clear, urgent, spoken in a voice that sounded so familiar, it made my blood run cold. I tried to convince myself it was a dream, but when I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of a pale hand breaking the water's surface, reaching toward me. Its skin was bloated, veins dark like river stones, and its nails scraped the edge of the wooden step. Then the face surfaced, drowned, lifeless eyes staring straight into mine. I woke with a scream lodged in my throat, drenched in sweat. My bedroom door was open, though I knew I had locked it. And faintly from downstairs I heard it again, the sound of something moving in the water. By the third day I knew I couldn't stay. Every hour in that house felt like a dare I was bound to lose. I packed my bag before sunrise, eager to leave. But when I turned the ignition, the car gave nothing but a weak click. Dead. I slammed the wheel. Tried again. Nothing. Fine, I thought. I'll call for help. But my phone screen mocked me with a constant, no service. Even the emergency call option failed. I walked down the dirt path toward the nearest cabin, one I remembered from childhood. The woods were silent, unnervingly so, until I reached the property and found it empty. Curtains drawn, door locked tight, no sign of life. By the time I made it back, the house loomed like it was waiting for me. And the basement door, though I swore I had locked it, was standing wide open. I grabbed the heaviest flashlight I could find and stormed down the stairs, determined to catch whatever was playing games with me. The beam cut across the water, and that's when I saw it. Just beneath the surface, a shape floated. Pale. Human. Its face hovered inches from the waterline, but the moment my light hit it, the thing drifted back into the depths with a sickening smoothness, as if pulled by invisible strings. I staggered back, nearly tripping over the steps. My breathing echoed in the narrow space, ragged and panicked. Then I noticed the water wasn't still anymore. It was shifting with a slow, steady current, like it was flowing from somewhere, or worse, to somewhere. It hit me then. This wasn't a flooded basement. This was connected. To what I didn't know. The lake? Something beneath it? My uncle's sudden death no longer seemed like a mystery. It felt like a warning. I bolted upstairs and slammed the door, dragging a chair against it. But all night long, no matter how tightly I pressed my hands over my ears, I heard the hinges creak, the chair scrape, the unmistakable sound of that door easing itself open again. And in the moments before dawn, I swore I heard footsteps on the stairs. Not going up. Coming down. Into the water. I couldn't take it anymore. The not knowing. The waiting. By morning, I tore through the house searching for answers. Drawers, closets, even the attic. That's when I found a tin box wedged behind loose boards in the study. Inside were journals worn thin with age, my uncle's handwriting scrawled across every page. The entries started ordinary, notes about repairs, hunting trips, long winters. But then the tone shifted. He wrote about the water under the house, describing it exactly as I'd seen it. Bottomless, silent, devouring anything dropped into it. He admitted hearing voices too. ones that called him by name. Some entries were just frantic sentences repeated over and over. Don't listen. Don't answer. Don't look too long. One page stopped me cold. In shaky ink, he wrote, "If you see yourself in the water, it's already too late." That night, the whispers grew unbearable. I locked every door, covered the mirrors, tried to drown it out with music. But the voices cut through everything, louder, more desperate. They weren't random anymore. They were begging, pleading for me to come down. And threaded among them was my own voice echoing from below, calling myself like a reflection that could speak. I couldn't resist. I opened the basement door. The water churned like it had been waiting. Slowly, a figure rose toward me. At first, I thought it was the same drowned stranger from my nightmare. But as the face broke the surface, my chest tightened. It was me. My own features, pale and bloated, hair floating like strands of dark weeds. Its eyes locked onto mine with a hunger that felt endless. My legs trembled. I wanted to run, but my reflection whispered my name again, perfectly like my own mouth had formed the word. The sound wrapped around me, pulling me closer to the stairs. I gripped the railing so hard my knuckles ached, but every step down felt inevitable, like gravity itself was dragging me toward the water. The figure didn't reach for me this time. It just waited, patient, smiling faintly as if it already knew how this would end. I don't remember how long I stood there, leaning over the last step, staring at that drowned version of myself. The basement felt smaller, the air heavier as though the entire house was pressing me downward. The water rippled without sound, reflecting my face above and my face below. Two versions of me staring back, neither blinking. Then it happened. The one in the water blinked first. I stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs. My reflection smiled wider, teeth too sharp in the dim light, and for the first time it moved without me. Its head tilted, slow and deliberate, before it lifted one pale, dripping hand toward the stair. I bolted up the steps, slamming the door behind me so hard the frame cracked. I pressed my body against it, trembling, praying I wouldn't hear anything on the other side. For a moment there was silence. Then came a sound I'll never forget, a single footstep. Not on wood, not on stone, on water. And I realized, with every hair on my body standing on end, that whatever lived in that basement no longer needed me to come down. It was learning how to come up. I woke up to silence so heavy it pressed against my ears as if the lake itself had stopped breathing. My room was dark, but a thin silver thread of moonlight slipped through the crooked blinds, sketching faint lines across the wooden floor. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, not yet sure what had pulled me from my dreams. Then I smelled it. Damp earth, that sharp mineral scent of wet stone and lake water, seeping in through the cracked window beside my bed. I turned my head, groggy, expecting to see nothing but the messy outline of my boots by the door. Instead, my body froze. A single wet footprint gleamed on the wooden floorboards, toes pointing inward toward my bed. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I pushed myself upright, the bed springs groaning like a warning. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just a trick of moonlight. But when I leaned closer, the outline of toes, heel, and dripping arches shimmered unmistakably against the wood. And then I noticed there wasn't just one. Trailing out into the hallway was a line of footprints, still wet, as though someone had just walked dripping from the lake, and into my home. I slid my legs over the edge of the bed, my bare feet hovering just above the boards as though touching them would make the prints more real. My throat was dry, my chest tight, but curiosity clawed at me harder than fear. Slowly, I lowered my heel onto the cold wood. It creaked under my weight, the sound sharp in the suffocating stillness. The footprints were darker now that I was closer, each one glistening like it had just been pressed into the boards. They led straight through the doorway and into the narrow hall, the trail uneven, the toes angled slightly inward, as if whoever or whatever made them was unsteady. I followed. The hallway stretched long and narrow, lined with faded family photos that had hung there since my parents owned the lake house. The glass frames reflected the moonlight in broken shards, making it feel like dozens of pale eyes followed me as I crept forward. Outside, the trees swayed, their shadows writhing across the floor as the wind sighed against the walls. Every few steps I stopped, straining to hear something, anything that might explain the prints. But all I caught was the low hum of the lake outside, a rhythm that had always been comforting until now. Tonight it felt like the water was holding its breath. My mind scrambled for logic. Maybe I'd forgotten to mop something up earlier, though I hadn't been near the water since sunset. Maybe a pipe burst, though that wouldn't explain the shape. I even thought of the stories I'd heard when I was younger. Whispers about bodies pulled under the lake, about the ones who never surfaced. Locals said you could still hear them on quiet nights, their voices tangled in the mist. The prints curved toward the living room, passing the staircase that creaked even when no one stepped on it. I hesitated there, staring at the dark ascent, half expecting to see someone waiting. But there was nothing, just the heavy gloom. My heartbeat thudded in my ears as I crouched near one of the prints, close enough to see droplets beating at the edges. Fresh, not hours old, minutes, and they were leading me deeper into the house. The footprints ended at the back door. At first glance, that should have made sense. The door faced the dock, the lake stretching just beyond. But when I reached for the knob, a cold jolt struck me. The deadbolt was locked. The chain latch was hooked. No one had gone out this way. I stepped back, my skin prickling. The prints had led here, but they didn't leave. A faint sound broke the silence. At first, I thought it was just the wind pressing against the walls, but it carried a wet cadence, like droplets pattering onto wood. I tilted my head, trying to trace it. Somewhere in the house, water was falling where it shouldn't. Hello? My voice cracked as soon as it left my throat. I hated how desperate it sounded. No answer came back, only that slow, irregular drip. I pressed my palm against the door, half hoping to feel the vibration of someone outside. Nothing. Then, just as I was about to turn, I caught something else, whispers. So faint I almost convinced myself they were echoes of the lake. They rose and fell in a rhythm that sounded like words blurred by distance, carried through water. I spun, flashlight beam cutting across the living room. The couch sat empty, the windows closed tight. The only movement was the curtain breathing slightly from the draft. My heart raced as I checked the windows one by one, pressing against the glass, finding every latch still locked. It didn't make sense. The prints had started inside my room. Not from a door, not from a broken window, from inside. I tried to breathe slow, tried to convince myself it was a dream I hadn't fully woken from, but the cold sweat trickling down my neck told me otherwise. I forced myself back toward the hall, listening. The dripping sound seemed to shift now, like it was following me, circling the rooms. Every creak of the old floorboard seemed too heavy, too deliberate, as though I wasn't walking alone. I glanced toward the staircase again, shadows pooling at the top like ink. My gut twisted, telling me I wasn't imagining it. Something was in here with me, and whatever it was, it hadn't left. I gripped the kitchen counter with trembling hands, forcing myself to think. If someone was in the house, I needed more than nerves. I needed something solid. My eyes fell on the knife block. I pulled the largest one free, its weight grounding me, even if it wouldn't make a difference against whatever left those prints. With my other hand, I snatched the flashlight from the drawer. The storm outside was swelling now. Wind rattled the shutters and a low rumble of thunder rolled across the lake. As if on cue, the power blinked once, twice, then cut out completely. The house dropped into darkness, suffocating and absolute. I thumbed the flashlight on, its narrow beam slicing across the living room. That's when I saw them. New prints glistening wet against the wood. They hadn't been there seconds ago. And worse, they weren't still. Drip, step, drip, step. Each footprint appeared one after another, fresh and deliberate, crossing the room in front of me. I froze, my breath locked in my chest. The sound of footsteps, slow, heavy, dragging, echoed across the boards, but nothing filled the beam of my light. I swallowed hard and followed the prints, knife shaking in my hand. They led past the couch, across the rug, and toward the staircase. The boards groaned under invisible weight, each creak sinking with the prints that materialized ahead. My pulse hammered as I tilted the light upward. The staircase glowed pale under the beam, but no figure stood there. Still, the sound of those steps continued, rising, deliberate, like someone climbing one stair at a time. I forced myself up after them, each step a battle against the instinct screaming at me to run. When I reached the landing, my legs nearly gave out. The trail of prints circled. Not away from me, not toward another room. They looped back toward my bedroom. The air thickened, cold and damp, carrying that same lake water stench I'd smelled when I first woke up. The whispers grew louder, no longer distant, but just out of reach, curling around my ears. Whatever had entered my house wasn't wandering. It had a purpose, and it wanted me back where I started. I stopped at the bedroom door, my chest heaving as though I'd been running. The footprints glistened in the beam of my flashlight leading straight inside. My hand shook as I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first. Stale water, algae, something rotten that had been dredged up from the bottom of the lake. The flashlight beam swept across the bed and my stomach dropped. The sheets were drenched, clinging heavy to the mattress as though someone had climbed in sopping wet and lain there, dripping until every inch was soaked. The pillow sagged in the middle, the outline disturbingly human. I staggered backward, my back hitting the hallway wall. My thoughts reeled and an old memory slammed into me. 10 years ago, a boating accident on this very lake. A storm had rolled in quick, overturning a fishing skiff. They found the boat 2 days later, but not the man. People said the lake had taken him, kept him. Now, standing in the dark, the whispers sharpened into fragments of words. My name. It was saying my name. The house shuddered. Doors slammed down the hall, one after another like a chain reaction. The air filled with rushing water, though the walls stayed dry. My light flickered, catching a shape at the far end of the hall. Tall. Human-like. Its skin gleamed slick, water running in rivulets down its form. It didn't move. It only watched. My throat tightened until I could barely breathe. My body screamed at me to flee, but the realization locked me in place. This thing hadn't come from the lake to wander aimlessly. It had come here, to me. The whisper surged into a low roar, overlapping voices dragging like currents. I stumbled backward into the room, the soaked sheets slapping against my legs. The air grew colder, wetter, as if the lake itself had risen into the house. My flashlight sputtered and died. I was left in darkness. And then the sound of footsteps resumed, slow and deliberate, closing in on me, each one punctuated by the sickening drip of water pooling across the floor. I ran. Knife still in my grip, I bolted for the front door, my bare feet slipping against the slick floorboards. The storm outside screamed against the walls, lightning flashing through the windows just long enough to show me what I already feared. The wet prints were everywhere now, scattered in every direction, crisscrossing the house as though I'd been surrounded the entire time. I fumbled with the lock, my hands trembling so hard I could barely twist the deadbolt. Behind me, the steady slap of wet footsteps drew closer, deliberate, unhurried, like it already knew I couldn't escape. I yanked the door open just an inch, then slipped. My legs shot out from under me, slamming me onto the boards. The knife skittered away into the dark. My head rang, vision spinning, and before I could crawl, I felt it. Cold, icy fingers clamped around my ankle. Not flesh, not bone, something softer, waterlogged like the grip of a drowned hand dragging from the depths. I kicked, screamed, but it pulled relentless, dragging me back down the hall toward the bedroom. The last thing I saw before the door slammed shut was the flicker of lights across the lake, and then only silence, broken by the endless drip of water. I always thought the lake house would be my escape, a place where the world couldn't touch me. But the moment I pulled up that gravel road with the trees bending in like watchful strangers, I felt something press against my chest, a heaviness I couldn't shake. The air smelled of damp pine and stagnant water, thick enough to taste. The house stood there waiting, its wood darkened with age, the windows reflecting the dull glow of the setting sun as if the place itself was holding its breath. Inside, it was colder than outside. The floor groaned under my weight, familiar yet foreign, the way childhood places always are when you're grown. Dust clung to the furniture, but the silence was the thing that gnawed at me. No hum of electricity, no chirping from outside, just silence, too complete, too heavy. On the dining table lay a thick leather-bound book. It hadn't been there before. The cover was cracked and weathered like skin stretched too thin. I reached for it, and the moment my fingers brushed the surface, the silence seemed to deepen. I didn't know it then, but that guest book would unravel everything I thought I knew about this place, about myself. The first thing I noticed about the guest book was the weight. It was heavier than it looked, almost as if the pages inside carried more than ink. I set it down and opened to the very first entry, written in elegant, looping handwriting. The ink had faded, but the name struck me. Eleanor Price, 1954. The name crawled through my mind because my grandfather used to tell stories about Eleanor, the girl who drowned in the lake before he was even born. I turned the page. More names, more dates. Each one a ghost from local lore. A fisherman who vanished in '72. A couple whose car was found abandoned near the woods in the '80s. A kid I remembered hearing about in high school, lost during a storm on the water. All dead. All neatly signed in the book as if they had checked in like ordinary guests. The deeper I read, the more the entries felt wrong. Some weren't just names. They had little notes, the water was calm tonight, or she sang to me from the shore. One even said, he won't leave the house alive. I told myself it had to be some sick joke, maybe left behind by bored family members or locals trying to scare trespassers. But when I flipped ahead, my chest tightened. The handwriting shifted from elegant script to hurried scrawls. Different people, different voices, but all ending the same. Dates, signatures, and silence afterward. Then I saw it. My last name, Carter, 1997, the year I was born. The signature matched my father's handwriting, though I had never once seen him open this book. He'd told me countless times he hated the lake house, that he hadn't stepped foot in it since he was young. Yet here was his name inked in black, as real as the paper beneath my hand. I sat frozen, the shadows in the room thickening as the sun dropped outside. I wanted to close the book, shove it into some drawer, but I couldn't. My eyes kept darting back, scanning the lines like I was searching for some rational explanation. Instead, all I found were names. Names of people who should not have been able to write anything at all. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house breathed around me, wood creaking in slow intervals like footsteps pacing overhead. I told myself it was just the frame settling, but the sound had rhythm. Deliberate, measured waiting. I lay on the couch instead of the bed, the guest book on the table beside me, its leather cover catching the faint glow of the moon through the window. I swore I hadn't left it open, but the pages fluttered as if stirred by an unseen hand. I forced myself to look. The handwriting was different now, sharp and jagged, ink still glistening wet. My throat tightened as I read the words. He arrived today at dusk. Alone. The house remembers him. The date was today. I staggered back, knocking over a chair, the sound crashing through the suffocating silence. My breath came ragged, and every shadow in the room seemed to stretch toward me. I slammed the book shut, but the echo of the words burned in my head. Whoever, or whatever, was writing knew I was here. The following hours crawled. I dozed off in fits, waking to whispers that seemed to seep from the walls. Sometimes they came from outside, near the lake, a soft chorus that rose and fell with the waters rippling. Other times they hissed just behind me, so close I could feel the cold brush of breath on my neck. Each time I turned, nothing was there. When dawn finally broke, the house seemed calmer, less suffocating. I almost convinced myself it had been a nightmare, but when I looked again at the table, the book was open. Another entry had appeared overnight, the ink deep and fresh. This time the words were worse. He will not see another sunrise. I gripped the cover, trembling, my pulse hammering in my ears. My name wasn't written yet, but I knew it would be. The book wasn't just recording the dead, it was predicting them. And now it had chosen me. By the third day, fear no longer came in waves. It sat with me like a constant companion. I tore through the house looking for answers, desperate to prove the book was just an elaborate prank. Dusty closets, warped floorboards, the attic that smelled of mildew and rot. Nothing explained what I'd seen. Yet everywhere I turned, I felt eyes on me, the weight of unseen figures pressing closer. In the living room, behind a stack of yellowed magazines, I found a wooden box filled with photographs. They were black and white, edges curled with age, showing guests who had once stayed here. Families smiling stiffly on the porch, fishermen posing with their catches, children splashing by the lake. At first it felt harmless, until I started recognizing the names. Each photo had scrawled notes on the back, identical to the handwriting in the guest book. One showed Eleanor Price, the girl who had drowned. Her image was sharp except for her face, blurred into a smear like smoke caught on film. Another photo showed the vanished couple, standing hand in hand at the shoreline, their shadows stretching far too long, curling into shapes that didn't belong to human bodies. My stomach twisted as I shuffled through more, each picture linking perfectly to the book's entries. Whoever wrote in it wasn't recording stories, they were binding lives to this place. And then I found one that stopped me cold. A picture of my father, young, barely 20. He was standing at the same dining table where I'd discovered the guest book. His hand rested on it, his expression unreadable, but his eyes looked terrified. On the back, in his unmistakable script, were words that made my skin crawl. "Don't come back here." I dropped the photograph, my hands trembling. My father had never told me he stayed here after his childhood. He never spoke of the house at all except with bitterness, like it was cursed ground. Now I knew why. He had signed the book. He had been trapped by it, just like me. The walls seemed to close in, every window reflecting my distorted face as though the house itself was studying me, deciding how my entry would end. I couldn't keep the book in the house anymore. Its presence was suffocating, its pages too alive. At dusk, I carried it to the dock, the lake glimmering under a sky bruised with clouds. The air was still, heavy as if the world itself was holding its breath. I opened the book one last time, praying the entries were gone, that the nightmare would break. Instead, the page turned on its own, crisp and deliberate, revealing words in fresh ink. "Tonight he joins us." Panic surged. I hurled the book into the lake. It hit the water with a hollow slap and sank, ripples spreading outward. For a moment I felt relief, but then the ripples stopped too quickly. The water stilled like glass, reflecting the book resting on the bottom, its pages dry, glowing faintly. My stomach turned as the surface broke, bubbles rising, and the book floated back up, drifting toward me as though the lake rejected it. I ran back inside, slamming the door, chest heaving. My relief was short-lived. The guest book lay open on the table, water dripping onto the wood. The ink bled across the page, forming letters that weren't there before. I forced myself to read, though every instinct screamed not to. It described my death in vivid, merciless detail. The house keeps him until the water takes him. He breathes his last beneath the surface, unseen hands dragging him down. The lights flickered, then died. Darkness swallowed everything except the pale glow of the book. The air thickened and the doors slammed shut, locking me inside. The walls groaned, wood bending as if the house itself exhaled. Shadows unfurled along the floorboards, stretching, reaching. I grabbed the book, tried ripping it apart, but the pages resisted, tough as stone. I set it aflame with a match, but the fire sputtered, suffocated in seconds, leaving the leather unscathed. In desperation, I hurled it against the wall, only for it to land upright, open, waiting. The final words etched themselves as I watched, helpless. "He cannot escape. Not tonight." And then, silence. The figure lingered for one long, endless moment, before vanishing as if it had never been there. My chest released, air rushing back in painful gasps. But the window was no longer dark. From the other side, a pale face pressed close, lips stretched in a smile I could not escape. I didn't stay to see if it would come through. At first light, I shoved my belongings into the car, not even bothering to fold or pack. My hands shook as I slammed the trunk and sped down the dirt road, gravel spitting beneath the tires. Every shadow between the trees felt alive. Every glimpse of water a reminder that I'd left something unfinished behind. The farther I drove, the more I told myself it was over. That lake house wasn't mine, never was. Let it rot, let it sink into the earth, it could keep its secrets. I repeated those words like a mantra, louder than the thrum of the engine, louder than the pounding of my pulse. But no matter how far I went, the glass followed me. I caught it in the corner of my eye, the shimmer of reflection, the sense of being studied. By the time I hit the highway, I had convinced myself it was paranoia. Until I glanced in the rearview mirror. There I was, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched, hands gripping the wheel. But the reflection didn't match. It smiled, slow and knowing, its lips curling wider as mine stayed still, and it hasn't stopped smiling since.